Amel's hair, once the color of midnight, now shimmered like spun silver in the lamplight. It framed a face etched with the stories of 35 years, a face that held both the shadows of hardship and the light of quiet strength. She moved through the bustling harem atrium, a ghost among the vibrant silks and laughter of the younger concubines. Their whispers, though hushed, pricked at her like thorns. "Look at Amel's hair," they would murmur. "So old, so dull." But Amel paid them no mind. Her heart held a different kind of treasure, a love for words that flowed like the fountain in the atrium, clear and constant. Tonight she held a freshly written poem, the ink still slightly damp on the parchment. It spoke of the quiet joy of a sunrise, of the wisdom gained through hardship, of a love that bloomed not in the flush of youth, but in the gentle glow of maturity. With a soft smile, she slipped the folded parchment under the Sultan's study door. This was her ritual, a secret offering of her heart to the one man who might understand. Sultan Nazim sat alone in his study, surrounded by scrolls and the scent of aged parchment. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the single empty chair opposite his desk, a chair reserved for the unknown poet whose words had sustained him for years. He unfolded the parchment, his fingers tracing the elegant script. As he read, a quiet peace settled over him. The words spoke to the loneliness he often felt, to the burden of leadership, to the yearning for a connection deeper than fleeting beauty. He closed his eyes, reciting the verses aloud, savoring their wisdom. "Who are you?" he whispered to the empty chair, "my anonymous solace." He longed to meet the poet, to thank them for the gift of their words, to see the heart that held such depth and understanding. The grand hall of the harem shimmered with light and laughter. Concubines, adorned in silks and jewels, flitted like butterflies around the overflowing tables laden with delicacies. The air was thick with the scent of spices and the tinkling of fountains. Amel sat quietly at the edge of the festivities, content to observe. Her silver hair, pulled back in a simple braid, stood in stark contrast to the elaborate hairstyles of the younger women. Nashwa, the Sultan's current favorite, a woman barely 20 years of age and renowned for her beauty, held court in the center of the room. Her laughter rang out, sharp and bright, as she regaled the other concubines with tales of the Sultan's favor. She caught sight of Amel, her smile twisting into a sneer. With a swift movement, she plucked a strand of Amel's silver hair. "Look," she proclaimed, holding the strand aloft like a captured flag. "Amel's wisdom grows with each grey hair. Perhaps soon she will be as wise as the ancient scrolls in the Sultan's library." The other concubines erupted in laughter, their eyes glancing at Amel with a mixture of pity and scorn. Suddenly, the hall fell silent. Sultan Nazim stood at the entrance, his gaze sweeping across the room. He saw Nashwa holding the silver strand, saw the laughter fading from the faces of the concubines, saw Amel's quiet dignity amidst the mockery. He strode towards Nashwa, his expression unreadable. He took the silver strand from her hand, his fingers closing gently around it. "She is my treasure," he said, his voice resonating through the silent hall. He turned his gaze to Amel, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. "For years," he continued, "I have found solace in the words of an anonymous poet, words that spoke of wisdom beyond years, of a heart that understands the burdens of life and the quiet joys of a sunrise." He paused, then recited the opening lines of the poem Amel had slipped under his door just hours before. Amel's breath caught in her throat. He knew. He recognized her words. Their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them, a connection forged in the shared language of poetry and the quiet strength of a silver strand. The days that followed the feast were filled with stolen glances and whispered conversations. Amel found herself summoned to the Sultan's study, not as a concubine, but as a storyteller. Nazim would sit in his chair, listening intently as she recounted tales of her childhood in a small village, of the hardships she endured, of the lessons she learned. He was captivated by her gentle voice, by the wisdom that shone in her eyes, a wisdom earned through experience, not just from books. He would ask her questions about the world, about the lives of ordinary people, questions that the other, younger concubines never considered. Amel, in turn, found herself drawn to his quiet strength, to the loneliness she sensed beneath his regal bearing. She saw in him a kindred spirit, a man who valued wisdom and understanding above fleeting beauty. They would talk for hours, the scrolls and maps in his study fading into the background as their conversation flowed, a gentle stream of shared thoughts and unspoken feelings. Amel shared stories of the desert nights, of the constellations that whispered ancient tales, of the resilience of the desert flowers that bloomed even in the harshest conditions. Nazim, in return, shared stories of his own travels, of the different cultures he had encountered, of the burden of ruling a vast empire. With each shared story, their connection deepened, a fragile bond forming between the silver-haired storyteller and the Sultan who sought solace in her words. Amel felt a flicker of hope, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. But with it came a growing fear, a fear of revealing her secret, the secret of the anonymous poems that had brought them together. She worried that if he knew the truth, if he knew that she was the poet he so admired, he might reject her, might see her only as an aging concubine who had dared to deceive him. The Sultan's open admiration for Amel did not go unnoticed. Whispers, like tendrils of smoke, began to curl through the harem and beyond, reaching the ears of courtiers and servants alike. "Have you seen how the Sultan looks at Amel?" one servant would murmur to another. "He hangs on her every word." "It's her stories," another would reply. "She weaves magic with her words, they say." But the whispers soon turned sour, tinged with disbelief and mockery. "An aging concubine with hair like moonlight," a courtier scoffed. "Has the Sultan lost his mind? There are a dozen younger, more beautiful women vying for his attention." "Perhaps he has grown weary of youthful folly," another suggested, though the words dripped with sarcasm. The whispers reached Nashwa's ears, fueling her jealousy into a burning rage. She paced her chambers, her fists clenched, her beautiful face contorted in anger. "He looks at her," she hissed, "as if she were a queen, and me, a mere servant girl." She could not bear the thought of losing the Sultan's favor, the power and prestige that came with being his chosen one. She vowed to reclaim her position, to remind the Sultan of her beauty, of her youthful charm, and to silence the silver-haired storyteller who dared to steal his gaze. One evening, as Amel sat by the atrium fountain, composing a new poem, a royal messenger approached. He bowed low and presented her with a gift from the Sultan, a set of intricately carved inkwells, filled with inks of vibrant hues she had never seen before. Each inkwell was a miniature work of art, depicting scenes from her favorite stories, the ones she had shared with the Sultan in his study. The messenger explained that the Sultan had commissioned these inks specifically for her, hoping they would inspire her poetry. Amel's heart fluttered with a mixture of joy and trepidation. This gift was a clear sign of the Sultan's growing affection, but it also intensified her fear. The more he valued her words, the greater the risk of his disappointment if he discovered her secret. Later that evening, Nazim summoned Amel to his study. He watched, a gentle smile playing on his lips, as she admired the inks, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. He asked her about her latest poem, about the inspiration behind its verses. Amel, emboldened by his kindness, found herself sharing more than just words. She spoke of her dreams, of her hopes for a world where wisdom was valued as much as beauty. Nazim listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. He found himself captivated not just by her words, but by the quiet strength that radiated from her, by the gentle wisdom that shone in her silver-grey eyes. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he pointed to a particular shade of ink, a deep, shimmering blue. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "reminds me of the desert sky, just before dawn, the sky you described in your poem." Amel's breath caught in her throat. The closeness, the shared understanding, it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. But the fear remained, a shadow lurking in the corners of her heart. She longed to confess, to tell him the truth about the anonymous poems, but the fear of rejection held her back, a silent barrier between them. Nashwa's jealousy festered like a wound. She watched from the shadows as Amel and the Sultan shared quiet moments in the gardens, as he sought her out for conversation, as he gifted her with tokens of his affection. Each stolen glance, each shared smile, was a dagger to Nashwa's pride. She had been the Sultan's favorite, the jewel of the harem, and now this aging concubine, with her silver hair and quiet wisdom, was stealing her place. She could not bear it. Nashwa's mind, sharp and cunning, began to spin a web of deceit. She remembered the Sultan's gift, the exquisite inks he had presented to Amel. She knew how much Amel treasured them, how they inspired her poetry. An idea, dark and venomous, took root in her mind. She would silence Amel's poetic voice, the very thing that had captivated the Sultan. Late one night, while the harem slept, Nashwa crept into Amel's chambers. She moved silently, like a serpent in the moonlight. She found the inkwells, their vibrant colors gleaming faintly in the darkness. From a hidden pouch, she retrieved a small vial filled with a clear, odorless liquid, a potent poison, one that would slowly, subtly destroy the ink's ability to flow, to create the elegant script that Amel so cherished. With a steady hand, she added a single drop of the poison to each inkwell, watching as it dispersed, leaving no trace of its presence. A cruel smile spread across her face. Soon, Amel's words would fail her, her poetry would fade, and the Sultan would turn his gaze back to where it belonged, back to Nashwa, the true jewel of the harem. Nashwa slipped back into the shadows, her heart filled with a venomous satisfaction. The serpent had struck. The Sultan's birthday arrived, a day of grand celebration in the palace. A feast was prepared, musicians filled the air with melodies, and dancers twirled in vibrant silks. As was tradition, the Sultan called upon his favorite poet to recite a new verse in his honor. All eyes turned to Amel. She approached the Sultan, her heart filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She dipped her quill into the shimmering blue ink, the one that reminded the Sultan of the desert sky. But as she touched the parchment, the ink refused to flow. She tried again, dipping the quill deeper, but the ink remained stubbornly clinging to the tip, refusing to release its vibrant color onto the page. Confusion clouded Amel's mind. She tried another ink, a deep emerald green, but the same thing happened. The ink would not flow. A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Nashwa, standing amongst the other concubines, watched with a smug smile playing on her lips. The whispers she had sown, the whispers about Amel's age affecting her abilities, now found fertile ground in the silence that hung heavy in the air. Amel's hands trembled. She looked at the Sultan, her eyes pleading for understanding, but his gaze was clouded with confusion and a flicker of disappointment. "What is this, Amel?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. Amel could not speak. Shame and humiliation washed over her, choking the words in her throat. She had failed him, failed to deliver the gift of her words, the one thing that had brought them together. The whispers intensified, now laced with open mockery. "See," one courtier sneered, "age has finally caught up with the old poet." "Perhaps she has finally run out of stories," another added, their words like daggers piercing Amal's heart. Amal bowed her head, tears welling in her eyes. She retreated from the Sultan's presence, her heart heavy with shame and the bitter taste of failure. The celebration continued, but the joy had been extinguished, replaced by the whispers of the court and the silent accusation hanging in the air. Amal withdrew into herself, a shadow moving through the bustling harem. The shame of her failed recitation clung to her like a shroud. She avoided the Sultan's gaze, afraid to see the disappointment in his eyes. The whispers of the court echoed in her ears, reinforcing her deepest fear, that she was too old, too insignificant to hold the Sultan's affection. The vibrant inks, once a source of inspiration, now sat untouched in their carved cases, a constant reminder of her public humiliation. She no longer slipped poems under the Sultan's door, her fear silencing the poetic voice that had once flowed so freely. She ate little, slept less, the joy that had bloomed in her heart slowly withering under the weight of her secret and the sting of Nashwa's cruel triumph. Nazim was perplexed by Amel's sudden change. The vibrant storyteller, the woman who had filled his study with laughter and wisdom, had become a ghost of her former self. He tried to reach out to her, to understand the reason for her withdrawal, but she deflected his attempts with polite excuses, her eyes avoiding his. He sent her gifts, small tokens of his affection, but they remained untouched in her chambers. He summoned her to his study, hoping to hear her stories, to see the light return to her eyes, but she came reluctantly, her voice quiet, her words measured. The easy flow of conversation, the shared laughter that had once filled his study, was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Nazim was left to wonder what had caused this sudden transformation, unaware of the poison that had seeped not just into Amel's inks, but into her very soul. He felt a growing distance between them, a chasm opening where once there had been a bridge of shared words and unspoken understanding. Aisha, Amal's devoted servant and confidant, watched with growing concern as Amal withered under the weight of her unspoken shame. Aisha had served Amel for years, witnessing the hardships she had endured, the quiet strength she possessed, the poetic fire that burned within her. She knew the whispers that circulated through the harem were untrue, that Amel's talent had not faded, that something else was at play. Aisha was a woman of simple means, but her loyalty to Amel was fierce and unwavering. She resolved to uncover the truth, to find the source of Amel's sudden silence. Late one night, Aisha pretended to retire to her quarters, but instead she shadowed Nashwa. She had noticed Nashwa's smug satisfaction after Amel's failed recitation, a look that had sparked a suspicion in Aisha's heart. She saw Nashwa slip out of the harem, a small vial clutched in her hand. Aisha followed, her heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. She watched, hidden in the shadows, as Nashwa entered Amal's chambers, moving with the stealth of a thief in the night. Through a crack in the door, Aisha saw Nashwa approach Amel's inkwells, saw the glint of the vial in the moonlight, saw the single drop of liquid fall into each well. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had witnessed an act of sabotage, a cruel betrayal. She waited until Nashwa had departed, then slipped into Amal's chambers. She examined the inkwells, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. There was no visible sign of tampering, but Aisha knew what she had seen. She returned to her own quarters, her mind racing. She had to tell Amal, had to warn her of the treachery that had silenced her voice. She knew Amal might not believe her, might dismiss her suspicions as the ramblings of a loyal but simple servant. But Aisha was determined to try. She had to protect Amel, to help her reclaim the voice that had been stolen from her. Aisha found Amel sitting by the atrium fountain, her gaze fixed on the swirling water, her face pale and drawn. Aisha approached cautiously, her heart heavy with the secret she carried. "My lady," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I must tell you something." Amel looked up, her eyes dull with sadness. "What is it, Aisha?" she asked, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Aisha took a deep breath, then recounted what she had witnessed the previous night, Nashwa's stealthy visit to Amel's chambers, the vial in her hand, the single drop of liquid falling into each inkwell. Amel listened in stunned silence. At first, a flicker of disbelief crossed her face. "Nashwa," she whispered, as if the name itself was a betrayal. "But why?" Aisha shook her head. "Jealousy, my lady," she replied. "She cannot bear to see the Sultan's favor shift to you." Amel's eyes widened, a dawning comprehension replacing the disbelief. "The inks," she murmured, her voice trembling. "That's why they wouldn't flow." A wave of anger washed over Amel, chasing away the lingering shame. She rose to her feet, her silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. "I must confront her," she declared, her voice regaining some of its former strength. Aisha followed Amel as she strode purposefully towards Nashwa's chambers. Amel knocked sharply on the door, her knuckles rapping against the polished wood. Nashwa opened the door, a look of surprise quickly replaced by a smug smile. "Amel," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a pleasant surprise." "Don't pretend, Nashwa," Amel said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I know what you did." Nashwa's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice now laced with a hint of defiance. "You poisoned my inks," Amel accused, her voice rising. "You sabotaged my recitation out of spite and jealousy." Nashwa's composure finally cracked. "So what if I did?" she hissed, her eyes blazing with anger. "You, an aging concubine, thought you could steal the Sultan's affection. You thought you could replace me?" "The Sultan values wisdom and kindness, not just beauty," Amel retorted. "Something you will never understand. He will tire of your stories," Nashwa sneered. "He will return to me, to my youth, to my beauty, and then I will be the one whispering poems in his ear. I will be the one he calls his treasure." Amel's heart ached at Nashwa's words, but she refused to let her see her pain. "You are a viper, Nashwa," she said, her voice cold and steady, "and your venom will eventually turn on you." Amel turned and left, Aisha following close behind. Amel was torn. She knew she should reveal Nashwa's treachery to the Sultan, but a part of her hesitated. If she exposed Nashwa, she would also have to reveal her own secret, the secret of the anonymous poems. She was still afraid of the Sultan's reaction, still afraid of being rejected for her age, for her deception. But Aisha's words echoed in her ears. "Jealousy, my lady, she cannot bear to see the Sultan's favor shift to you." Amel knew she couldn't let Nashwa's treachery go unpunished. She had to find the courage to speak the truth, not just for herself, but for all the women in the harem who lived under the shadow of Nashwa's ambition and cruelty. Sultan Nazim had grown increasingly troubled by Amel's withdrawal. He missed her stories, her gentle laughter, the quiet wisdom that had brought him so much solace. He couldn't understand why she had distanced herself so abruptly. He also noticed a change in Nashwa. She had become bolder, more assertive, often lingering near his study, offering him unsolicited advice, reciting poems she claimed to have written herself. He found her newfound attentiveness unsettling, her poems lacking the depth and sincerity that he had come to cherish in the anonymous verses. One afternoon, Nazim discovered a new poem slipped under his study door. The handwriting was similar to the anonymous poet's, but the words felt different, lacking the familiar warmth and wisdom. He compared it to the previous poems, noticing subtle differences in the style, the rhythm, the very essence of the words. A suspicion, a small seed of doubt, began to take root in his mind. He recalled Nashwa's eagerness to please, her sudden interest in poetry, her frequent presence near his study. He decided to test his suspicions. He placed the new poem amongst his collection, leaving it in a prominent position on his desk. Then he instructed his guards to discreetly observe Nashwa's movements. He waited, a sense of unease settling over him, a premonition that something was not right within the walls of his palace. Late that night, Nazim, feigning sleeplessness, returned to his study. He hid himself behind a towering bookshelf, the scent of aged parchment filling the air. He didn't have to wait long. The door creaked open, and Nashwa slipped into the room, moving with a furtive grace that belied her usual boldness. She glanced around nervously, then approached his desk. Her eyes fell upon the poem he had strategically placed there. A triumphant smile spread across her face. She picked up the poem, admiring it as if it were her own creation. From beneath her robes, she produced several more poems, written in a hand that mimicked the anonymous poet's script. She carefully placed them amongst his collection, arranging them so they appeared to be part of the original set. Nazim watched, his heart sinking with each movement she made. His suspicions were confirmed. Nashwa was not just ambitious, she was deceitful, a serpent masquerading as a songbird. He stepped out from behind the bookshelf, his shadow falling across the desk. Nashwa whirled around, her eyes widening in terror as she saw him standing there, his face etched with disappointment and anger. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice quiet but laced with steel. Nashwa stammered, her carefully crafted facade crumbling under the weight of his gaze. I was just admiring your collection, Your Majesty," she stammered, her voice trembling. "These poems, they are so beautiful." Nazim picked up one of the poems she had planted, his fingers tracing the forged script. "And these, too, are beautiful, are they not?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So beautiful that you felt the need to add them to my collection, as if they were your own." Nashwa's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth was etched on her face, plain for all to see. The Sultan knew. He had caught her in her web of deceit. Nazim held the plagiarized poems in his hand, his gaze fixed on Nashwa. "These are not your words," he stated, his voice calm but unwavering. "They are a pale imitation of the true poet's art." Nashwa's defiance wavered. I can explain," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. "Explain how you came to possess poems so closely resembling those I treasure?" Nazim pressed, his voice growing sterner. "Explain how you managed to replicate the handwriting, the style, the very essence of the anonymous poet I have admired for years." Nashwa's silence spoke volumes. She knew she was trapped. Her carefully constructed lies were unraveling, exposing the ugliness beneath. Nazim continued, his voice now laced with anger. "You thought you could deceive me, Nashwa. You thought you could steal the words of another and claim them as your own." Tears welled in Nashwa's eyes, not tears of remorse, but tears of frustration and thwarted ambition. "I only wanted to please you," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. "I wanted to be the one whose words brought you solace, the one you called your treasure." "True solace comes from honesty, from a pure heart," Nazim replied, his voice softening slightly. "Not from stolen words and deceitful schemes." He paused, then continued, his gaze piercing through her facade. Tell me, Nashwa, what else have you done to secure your position? What other acts of deceit have you committed in your pursuit of favor? Nashwa hesitated, her eyes flitting nervously towards the door. She knew that further lies would only deepen her predicament. Nazim's eyes narrowed. He recalled Amal's sudden withdrawal, the whispers about her failing abilities, the strange behavior of her inks. "The inks," he said, his voice now a low growl. "Tell me about Amal's inks." Nashwa flinched, her silence confirming his suspicions. He knew with a sickening certainty that she had poisoned Amal's inks, silencing the true poet's voice out of jealousy and spite. "You poisoned them," he stated, his voice cold and hard. "You sabotaged her recitation, hoping to discredit her in my eyes." Nashwa's face was ashen. She sank to her knees, her tears now flowing freely. "I confess," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I did it. I poisoned her inks. I wanted her gone. I wanted to be the only one." Nazim looked at her, a mixture of anger and disappointment swirling within him. He had been blinded by her beauty, by her youthful charm, failing to see the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. "Your confession will not go unpunished, Nashwa," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "You have betrayed my trust, and for that you will face the consequences." Nazim summoned Amel to his study. He held the poisoned inkwells in his hands, their delicate carvings now mocking reminders of Nashwa's treachery. Amel entered, her gaze downcast, her steps hesitant. She still carried the weight of her perceived failure, the shame of her silenced voice. "Amel," Nazim began, his voice gentle, "I know the truth about the inks." Amel's head snapped up, her eyes widening in surprise. You know?" she whispered. Nazim nodded. He recounted what he had witnessed, Nashwa's nocturnal visit to her chambers, the vial in her hand, the poison she had added to the inks. Amel listened, her initial surprise giving way to a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that the truth was finally revealed, anger at Nashwa's betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nazim asked, his voice tinged with concern. Amel's gaze dropped again, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her robe. "I was afraid," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that you would believe the whispers, that you would think I was too old, too insignificant." Nazim reached out, his hand gently cupping her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. "Amel," he said softly, "your words, your stories, they are more precious to me than any jewel in my treasury. Your age, your silver hair, they are a testament to the wisdom you possess, a wisdom I have come to cherish." He paused, then continued, his voice now laced with a hint of urgency. "There is something else I need to know, Amel, something that has haunted me for years." He held up the stack of anonymous poems, their worn edges a testament to how often he had read them. "These poems," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "the words that have sustained me through countless lonely nights, are they yours?" Amel's breath caught in her throat. The moment she had both dreaded and longed for had finally arrived. She looked at the poems in his hand, then back at his expectant gaze. She knew she could no longer hide behind her anonymity, could no longer keep her secret hidden in the shadows. "Yes," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "They are mine." She closed her eyes, bracing herself for his rejection, for the disappointment she was sure she would see in his eyes. But the rejection never came. Instead, she felt his hand gently caress her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized she had shed. She opened her eyes to see a look of wonder and joy in his gaze, a look that warmed her heart and chased away the lingering shadows of fear. "My anonymous solace," Nazim whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It was you all along." He looked at her, his eyes shining with a light she had never seen before. The words that touched my soul, the wisdom that guided me through darkness, they came from you, from the woman I have come to admire. Not just for her words, but for the strength and kindness I see in her eyes. Amal's heart swelled with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. I never dared to hope, she confessed, her voice trembling, that you would feel the same. Nazim took her hands in his gaze holding hers with a tenderness that melted away the last vestiges of her fear. "Amel," he said, his voice filled with a depth of feeling she had only dreamed of, "your words have been a beacon in my life, a source of comfort and inspiration. And now, to know that they come from you, from the woman who has captured my heart with her stories and her wisdom, it is a gift beyond measure." He paused, then continued, his voice now filled with a playful teasing. "You deceived me, Amel. You hid your light under a bushel, your talent behind anonymity." Amel smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face and made her silver hair gleam like a halo. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice now steady and clear, "afraid that my age, my differences, would make me unworthy of your attention." Nazim chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that resonated deep within Amel's heart. "Amel," he said, his voice filled with gentle reassurance, "your differences are what make you so extraordinary. Your silver hair is a crown of wisdom, your age a testament to the experiences that have shaped you into the remarkable woman you are. You are not just my poet, Amel, you are my treasure." He summoned his guards. "Bring Nashwa to me," he commanded, his voice now edged with steel. Nashwa was brought before them, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear. She had heard the whispers of the Sultan's discovery, knew that her deceitful schemes had been exposed. "Nashwa," Nazim said, his voice cold and hard, "your treachery has been revealed. You have poisoned the inks of a true artist. You have attempted to steal the words of another, and you have betrayed the trust I placed in you. For these transgressions, you are banished from the palace. Leave and never return." Nashwa's face crumpled. She opened her mouth to plead for forgiveness, but Nazim silenced her with a wave of his hand. The guards escorted her away, her sobs echoing through the silent hall. Nazim turned back to Amel, his gaze now soft and filled with love. "Amel," he said, taking her hands in his once more, "you have shown me the true meaning of beauty, the true meaning of wisdom. You have shown me that true love blossoms not in the fleeting flush of youth, but in the gentle glow of shared understanding and mutual respect." He paused, then added, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "Will you share your wisdom, your stories, your heart with me, Amel? Will you be my sultana?" Tears of joy welled in Amel's eyes. "Yes, my sultan," she whispered, her voice filled with a love as deep and enduring as the desert sky. Nazim raised her hand to his lips, gently kissing her fingers. "Then let us begin our reign, my silver queen," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness that echoed through the halls of the palace. News of Amel's elevation to sultana spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. Many courtiers were shocked, their whispers echoing the disbelief they had expressed at the sultan's growing affection for the silver-haired concubine. "A sultana with hair like moonlight," they murmured. "Has the sultan truly lost his mind?" But others, those who had witnessed Amel's wisdom, her kindness, the quiet strength that radiated from her, rejoiced. They knew that the Sultan had chosen wisely, that he had found a partner who would rule not with vanity and ambition, but with wisdom and compassion. The day of Amel's coronation was a day of celebration unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Amel, adorned in a gown of shimmering silver, her hair flowing freely around her shoulders, stood beside Nazim, her hand clasped in his. She no longer hid her silver strands, but wore them with pride, a symbol of her wisdom and experience. As Nazim placed the crown upon her head, he declared, "My people, behold your sultana, a woman whose wisdom shines brighter than any jewel, whose heart is as pure as the desert stars." Amel's reign was marked by a flourishing of art and intellect. She established a school of poetry open to all, regardless of age or social standing. She encouraged the sharing of stories, the celebration of different voices, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. She became a patron of the arts, supporting musicians, painters and storytellers from all corners of the kingdom. And the women of the palace, inspired by Amel's grace and wisdom, began to embrace their own aging. Silver hair became a symbol of wisdom and experience, a mark of distinction rather than a source of shame. Women no longer sought to hide their grey strands, but adorned them with jewels and intricate braids, emulating the Silver Queen who ruled beside their sultan. Nazim and Amel ruled together, their love a beacon of hope and inspiration for their people. They listened to the voices of their subjects, they sought wisdom in the stories of the common people, they made decisions based on understanding and compassion, not on greed or ambition. Their love story became a legend, whispered from generation to generation, a tale of a sultan who valued wisdom above beauty, and a silver queen whose words and wisdom transformed a kingdom. And as they ruled hand in hand, the kingdom flourished, not just in wealth and power, but in the richness of its culture, the wisdom of its people, and the enduring power of love.